Thank you very much, Pastor Joel. Yeah, I'm so glad you did the icebreaker on what actually woke is about. In fact, I came about this topic in a very funny sort of way. I came just over the last 1 month. People were referring to this term woke a lot, many times. And as I'm, yeah, that's right. As I'm looking into this topic, I myself have discovered a lot of different things as I did some research into it. So today, I'm going to talk about woke. It's a funny 4-letter word, another one of those 4-letter words, but it has a special meaning to it. And it has special meaning especially to the younger generation, more than the older generation, but I believe that we are all intergenerational. So it applies to every one of us as much as it does to the millennials. So, woke. What is woke all about? Well, English is such a funny language, isn't it? Like, for example, T-O-N-G-U-E is pronounced as Tong you? No, it's not, right? It's pronounced as tongue, right? T-O-N-G-U-E is pronounced as tongue. How about F-O-N-D-U-E? A word that's imported from good old England's neighbor. It's not fond, right? It's fondue. It's fondue. So it's pronounced as fondue. So each letter, each word in the English vocabulary has a different meaning and it's pronounced differently. Usually, woke is a past, simple past participle of the letter wake, and many times it is pronounced as awaken or to wake up or awoken. But to use the word woke has a special meaning. Now, how did this come about? How did this woke come about? That's very interesting. Let me just get the first slide up. Is the slide up? Oh, that is fondue, right? Okay. Righto. Right, and here we go. Okay, now these languages that we come across in the English language, they evolve over a period of time. And language doesn't always stay the same. Words that were popular once in a while will evolve into a different word. Like, for example, what do you call it? Brexit. At one time, people were using it before the Brexit, and it was actually in the Oxford English Dictionary. But now we don't even hear the word Brexit anymore. And it's not unusual for a word or phrase to make its round into the language and go into the mainstream and get people confused about its meaning. Often it is a confusion through the deception that many people sometimes plonk a word inside there, and people, when they hear about it, like many of you, when Pastor Joel asked, how many of you heard about the word woke? You didn't really know what the actual meaning was. So when you don't know the meaning, and when there's confusion, deceit creeps in. G.K. Chesterton, who was a famous man of God who lived about 100 years ago, has this to say of confusion. Evil takes advantage of ambiguity. In other words, in the middle of confusion, a lot of times, evilness creeps in. So my aim for the talk today is make sure nobody leaves this room more confused than you already were when you entered it, okay? Now, confusion happens due to different forms of usage according to different groups of people that use it, or to the different locations where you use this word. For example, in Malaysia, we have what we call Manglish, okay? We mangle English with Malaysian, Bahasa Malaysia, and English. So it comes out, you'll find that in a conversation, you will find that there are Malay words coming in, Chinese word. Hey, have you makan already? You know, have you eaten? But we add the Malay word makan inside there. So to someone like Tom, you may not understand what I'm saying when I use the word makan that comes in there. But even in America itself, when the English language is used, there is a difference between what the American blacks and the whites. I'm not talking about New Zealand All Blacks and the British All Whites team. I'm talking about the American blacks and the white. They use the language in a slightly different way. Also, between Europe and Asia, we use the same word sometimes in different ways. So a lot of times it's due to non-intentional sociological factors, or even maybe due to intentional manipulative means that someone has an agenda to promote, and they slip that word or that phrase in. One such word that's been used with increasing frequency. As I said, in this last 1 month, I've been encountering quite a number of times is the word woke. And this woke is also linked with wokeness, wokeism, and to be woke or hashtag stay woke. You will see many of these, they're all linked together and they mean the same thing. Now, what exactly does woke mean? Well, the old meaning of woke simply defines it as the past simple, past participle awake, or as in to wake up or awake. Now, woke today, according to the Oxford Dictionary, refers to being aware or well-informed in a political or cultural sense, especially regarding issues pertaining to marginalized communities. In other words, like what Pastor Joe said, you're aware, you know what are the problems, the issues, especially regarding this small group of people. It describes someone who has woken up to issues of social injustice. It boils down to social injustice. And that's a good thing, to know about the social injustices that are happening around us, initially. Because this name, though it sounds new and catchy, is actually an old idea. It's an old idea. Many users claim that they want to help the weak, the minority, the marginalized, but later we can see that it actually does not empower this group. It weakens them. There are subliminal political underpinnings to usage of these words. It started and mainly used by political parties to engender more political power. But more than just being political, in a deeper sense, there is also a spiritual undercurrent to it. And I would like to impart some Christian perspectives on it tonight. In a modern sense, the meaning of the word has changed a lot. And in 2017, the new meaning of the word woke was officially added to the Oxford English Dictionary, as I said. It was simultaneously described to by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as a chiefly US slang. And to stay woke means become a watchword for many parts of the black community, for those who are self-aware, questioning the dominant paradigm and striving for something better. Now, what exactly does it mean? It just basically means a group, a marginalized group, the black community, has suddenly come and used this word very often in special relationship to the circumstances that they are in. They are actually being discriminated upon, and they actually use it. Well, it's a good thing, as I said, but according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, it becomes a watchword, a special word used by the black community. And it has also been caught on by the rest of the world. And you find that sometimes a lot of our younger friends here, your friends use this word, hey, you woke up. Not just haven't you woken up this morning, but do you know about what's going on? So it's not only used by the millennial generation, it's used by a lot of us too. But not so much so in the Malaysian kopitiam conversation, but we do use it quite often. So, are you woke yet? You haven't fallen asleep, right? Okay. So, what are the origins of woke? Well, the earliest usage of woke in this political aware sense can be traced back some 60 years ago to this chap called William Melvin Kelly. Now, he wrote in this 1962 version of the New York Times magazine in that time. And this article, If You Are Woke, You Dig It. He was a musician and he wrote on that. And the word was therefore birthed in Harlem, the epicenter of the black community in America. Kelly argued that when words in black culture are co-opted by the white people, when the white people begin to adopt it and use it, they lose their real meaning. The term later became popular again in 2008 as the feminist activist and singer Erykah Badu used to use the word I Stay Woke in a chorus of her song Master Teacher. She later also commented on the Pussy Riot, a feminist group in Russia that was actually put into jail. And she again brought up this term woke amongst the media. But the real interest in the word woke gathered during the hits on the Google searches in 2014 and again in 2021 in America. Now, a little trivia here. What were those dates? What did these dates represent? Where everybody was actually glued to the internet and defined what was the latest that was happening. And then there were riots, there were a lot of disagreement, dissension in America. Do you remember what happened in 2014? I think Pastor Joel knows. Yeah? There was a killing of a black man by the police, Michael Brown. in 2014. And again, it happened, George Floyd in 2021. Another black man was actually, well, not intentionally, but still accidentally killed by a white police officer. And this turned the whole of American society. Out of the 50 states, half of them, they were rioting in the states, there were fires set, there were shops set afire, they were looting, there were people demonstrating in the streets. They were saying that the people were woke to the discrimination, to the suffering, to the marginalization of the black community during those times. Merriam-Webster describes the word woke became entwined with the Black Lives Matter movement. Instead of just being a word that signaled awareness of injustice or racial tension, it became a word of action. The word woke means you not only know about it, you must take some action, birthed out of discontent and anger. Activists were woke and call on others to stay woke. Today, the term woke is removed from its roots in black culture to a symbol people all around the world, maybe not so much so here yet, but it will come. It's coming. Singapore people are using it very often because this woke has an agenda behind it of pushing back against social justice progress. Anytime there's social injustice and there are groups pushing against it, the word woke appears and surfaces. But Noel Merring, a fellow of the Washington-based think tank Ethics and Public Policy Center, and a writer too, posited that this concept or ideology of activism against social injustice or woke didn't just start 60 years ago. It started about 90 years ago when Karl Marx, you all know who Karl Marx is, right? Right? He's German, but he's the father of communism. He adopted Hegel, another German, Hegel's idea of progression in societies towards a utopia, a perfect society, which arises from societal discontent. Society wants change, so the discontent foments a revolution, a change, and then the people revolt against the authority, the government, and brings out a new society. So it's a little bit like karma. You go through cycles and cycles and cycles of it until you reach nirvana. So Hegel is saying that society changes, you go through cycles of these changes, and then you reach utopia. Well, it was a concept. It was an ideology. But Karl Marx took it up upon himself. And he gave birth to the ideology of communism. But it was later Lenin and even Mao Zedong, together with many activists, when woke, took it up a notch with the other activists and turned it into revolutions in Russia and in China. The rise of the oppressed against the oppressors in the quest for social justice and equality. The rise of the oppressed against the oppressors in the quest for social justice and equality. So currently, when this same woke culture takes on a strong or widespread element of activism, it enables any society, not just American, to see through the filters of power ultimately. You begin to see things through degrees of power. How much power can you garner when you use words like this? Essentially, some groups will become the oppressors who hold the power, while others are being oppressed and they're powerless. It has become an ideology that says all of humanity is involved in a power contest. So, the woke movement has evolved to invert the power structure with a potential aim of revolution. That means those in power must be toppled, and those who are not in power are now empowered through using of this language and the gathering together of people with one mind, one heart. There is that unity there through this language that's being used. Like Black Lives Matter is a movement, and it's grown to affect half of the cities in America. So there is power behind it. So the woke movement, as I said, has grown to involve the inversion of the power structure with the potential aim of revolution. Now, revolution is a dangerous word. No government would like to hear of that word. Many of the secret police, the Russian secret police, the East Germany at one time, the secret police, and many of the secret polices, even in the Secret Service in America, are all alarm bells will ring once you hear of that. But it was born out of a cry for justice, but devoid of compassion and mercy. like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The Christian take on woke can be exemplified for what Jesus said in the Gospels. You heard it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. In other words, Jesus is saying, even if you talk about justice, there is a degree of evilness in there. So be careful when you say about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. He goes on to say, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn on the other cheek, and it talks about extra mile and the tunic and all that. But a bit later down, he says, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. There's this element of altruism there, charity there. So from this and other parts of the biblical teaching, it is the Christian's duty to be aware of the role of upholding justice, to be woke, and to act on it positively with compassion and mercy, in correcting social injustices through preemptive actions of love, charity, and willingness to go the extra mile. But not to be aware and then to act harshly, or to correct injustices through demonstration that often turn violent, wicked, or if I might extrapolate here, with a hidden political agenda. And that's where the fine line is. Is it, if someone were to ask, is it okay to be woke? This is where you draw the fine line. So, woke being an ideology, in a true form for any ideology, the woke movement itself takes partial truths, some truth in it, and totalizes them so as to present a lie fundamentally. It makes one believe that the only way to look at the world is through the lens of power and domination. It defines a human person differently from the biblical perspective that we are rational creatures. We are creatures that are also made in the image of God and also sons and daughters of a loving Father God. We are also defined by our relationship to God and by love Himself, not by race, class, gender, and certainly not by sexuality. And you see the difference, being woke and being aware. Then I would like to say a little about the language of the woke movement. I started off by talking about the language. There is a very strong anti-oppression narrative used by the movement in a fervency to correct social injustice. Not just racism, but in all means of influence, in adopting the unconventional way of doing things, in coming out of the closet, and even in going for the young minds. The millennial generation is intentionally targeted for fomenting of discontent. For example, over strict moral values. Like they're told, you frown on, like the older generation or other people frowning on pornography and licentiousness. That's not the cool thing. You should be woke of the fact that you don't need to frown on these things. So in the quest for massive financial returns, Hollywood to have no qualms in sacrificing these moral values to promote celebrity culture and to impress upon the young generation how they are free to live the way they want. Even the very young children are not spared, as very high quality digitalized animations like, guess what animations or what animations that are produced by Hollywood actually even promote this woke culture. Any takers? Disney, yes, some of them, but any idea which film? Let me tell you, the green one. Not Hulk, but Shrek. Even Shrek. Shrek talks about being different, being ugly, being rejected, being marginalized. But yet, there is power that you can find by being different. Even Frozen, which is very popular amongst the little girls. You know, they find the idol in a girl, you know, who is the frozen princess. And yet, through the morale that's behind it, it actually promotes it's okay to be different. It's okay to embrace the unconventional. To be a hero is to go unconventional. And that's the message, the subliminal message that goes out. In our postmodern society, every distortion of truth is present in every sphere of influence. Language becomes associated with power. If you are fluent, if you are able to manipulate others through language, you hold the power. So this movement continues as a form of manipulation. constant redefinition of words and languages, enabling the manipulation of the interior life, even of our community that we all dwell in. The meaning of innocuous words that we use can be manipulated around to mean something else. Let me give you an example. Equity. Equity. Equity is a word that everybody would like to say that is a good thing. Equity, equality, you know. But to the proponents of the woke culture, in order for there to be equity, the outcome must be exactly equal amongst the oppressors and even the oppressed, so that oppressors must be brought down to the level of the oppressed. Despite the many challenges posed by different factors, society is not as simple as, you and I, you're rich, I'm poor, therefore you sell all your riches, you become poor. It's not as simple as that. There are many factors that come in. So any inequitable outcome, unbalanced, then becomes taken as some form of racism. You see, if I were an American black, I could never reach the education standard. I could never reach the job because of my poor education achievement. So therefore, there is inequity. And that's unfair. And that's injustice. And therefore, I will say that you are a racist because you are white and I'm black. So racism comes in. Sexism comes in when there's gender inequality and some form of other forms of social oppression. It eliminates any form of measure that seeks to rectify it. Let me give you another example. You know the new world maths? You know what's 2 by 2? 2 plus 2? No, 5. If a student says it's 5 in the classroom, the teacher is not allowed to say that, no, you're wrong. That's the new world maths. 5 is acceptable as an answer. Why? Because it is in accordance to the lived experience of the child, just a child, the lived experience of the one who answered that. Well, you may laugh at it, the child doesn't know the answer, it's supposed to be 4, but it's 5. But the ideology, the woke ideology, claims that all standards, when removed, that all successes and failures are attributed to forces outside of themselves. That means the child is not responsible for giving an answer other than 4. You can give a 6, you can give a 3, you can give a 5. It's still acceptable because it's the external forces that determine whether it's right or wrong, not the internal ability of the child. That means the teacher is now taught to be woke, means you are aware that you must, and reinforce the answer that the child is given. Now, there's a partial truth to it, because when the advantages are removed, this can lead to some form of equity, so that the poor child who's very far behind in this class are on the same standard as the child who's brilliant, who's a little genius Einstein, a little mini Einstein. So there is some form of equity, but however, when the child grows up, there's no government or external tool or societal tools can determine individual successes or failures. And in a Christian belief, one's successes and failures should also be attributed to God's sovereign rule too, and not just by men's doing, where God will bestow upon one or the other a success or failure, the blessing, or He will bestow or take away the blessing from the person, depending on whether God is honored or not on the man's puny efforts. Now, with a failure to communicate clearly and without clear understanding that our words are connected to reality, 4 is a reality. You can give all you want, you can tell the answer is 5 or 6 or 3, the teacher can say you're right, but the reality is that it is still wrong. Words, when being manipulated in this form by the woke movement, becomes tools that we can wound each other with, or even destabilize our community. With them being applied mainly in the field of two types of field. One, identity politics. You heard of the 2016 presidential elections. How stories, fake news were abound everywhere, the US presidential elections. And eventually, the former president was elected. Words are used to manipulate whole nations. That is linked to this woke movement. Even up to today, the US Republicans are actually supported mainly by middle upper class whites, and the Liberal Democrats by a very diverse populace. Let's look even in our own land. The politics here are along racial lines too. Also since the 1980s, there have been along racial lines. And it's been so railed in our society that these racial political parties are espousing racial hatred amongst one another too. Then there are, the second point, the presuppositions. They're all built on Hegel and Marx and their followers around the globe. Now, the average student, the average person who goes to have a cup of coffee in a kopitiam will, or even not necessarily only in Malaysia, but anywhere else in the world, would hardly have read Hegel or Marx. And therefore, when you begin to use this language in such a manipulative, confusing way, will of course be led into confusion by the movement's ideology. Anyone too that will want to fight for justice and against racism will be taken in and say, yeah, these are very good things that you talked about, and yeah, count me in. These are also foundational values and beliefs for the Christian. But the woke ideology is all prevalent, ubiquitous, all around us, in narratives, in stories, in movies, we tell, even in stories we tell to the children, in the media, politics, academies, and so on. So when a little bit of these partial truths here and there, little scattered pieces of half-truths, are all added together, it becomes a default thinking that we will begin to slowly come into our worldview, our outlook. That our filter, therefore, will say, this woke movement, there's no lie in it. There's a saying, if you tell a lie often enough, it begins to sound like the truth. We begin to be numb to it, and we find that, hey, everything is all right. These lies are actually truths, actually, by the way. I mean, nobody disputes it, and everybody keeps silent about it, so it must be true. C.S. Lewis, the late Oxbridge professor of literature, he was a professor of literature in both Oxford and Cambridge, said in his book, The Screwtape Letters. How many of you have read the book before? Screwtape Letters. Never even heard of it, huh? Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about the book. Screwtape are actually supposed to be minions of Satan. Okay, he's the uncle, and Wormwood is the nephew. And the Screwtape Letters are a series of letters supposedly written. It's non-existent, but it's a sort of a fantasy. But it's a parody of what happens in real life. So the chief, Satan's right-hand man, writes to the underling and says, this is how you should entice and tempt the world. So in one of the letters, Screwtape says this: the most effective and powerful tool to recruit more to hell, so in other words, to gain Satan's army, is to convince the people that the devil doesn't exist. Nothing much. You don't have to distract them, you don't have to tempt them, you don't have to throw pretty women, you don't throw money, you don't have to throw power. All you have to do is to convince them the devil does not exist. And they will dig their own way down. So in parallel, the woke ideology is powerful because it fools us into not realizing that we are looking at the world through a filter that convinces us that it's not there at all. Finally, can the woke movement be harmful? There are 5 areas in which it can be harmful. The first is a division in all layers of society. Division is created in all layers of society. Christians are especially affected as they are, by obedience to biblical teaching, drawn into good. For example, by defending against racism, as throughout the Bible, there are warning of discrimination against foreigners and between Jews and non-Jews. So we are not supposed to discriminate. But when we are taken in by the woke movement, they also have to agree with the bad precepts that are aligned to it, the political the underpinnings of it, the various agendas of the different lobby groups that are in it. And then this will lead to confusion and division. Like even the American church were divided, split right down the middle. The whole country was split right down the middle because half of them believe in one of the presidential candidates in 2016, and the other half believe in the other half of the electoral candidate. Even closer home, right now I'm in a church that I attend. There was a disgruntled senior leader that left recently, and he claimed to be suddenly made aware, to be awoke of the fact that there's so many shortfalls of ministry that was in the same church that he served in, and he was a leader in, that he was actually carrying out the ministry in that same capacity for the last 10 years. And he made use of the media to further his claim to wokeness. Now, whether it was intentionally done or not, it's a moot point. As many young minds that read the media posting had no idea, no inkling of the actual situation, and may be confused by the language and the half-truths that were espoused, creating uncertainty through deceit and attacking the faith of God's family members. Now, this can potentially lead to divisions as a result of the predatory attack on the hearts and mind of the younger generations. However, God is still sovereign. God in His sovereignty is always in complete control, and He will vindicate in His time. And that's what we trust in. The second harmful area would be a woke movement can weaken the oppressed instead of empowering them. They start off by wanting to empower them. But on the surface, being woke appears to support the marginalized and the minority in the name of justice. There is a concealed, this is concealed, but there is an undercurrent in creating a huge support base of confused, discontented, and disillusioned individuals who are keen to overturn the convention and go against authority. It boils back down to a revolutionary ideology. Take, for example, the prevalence of gender dysphoria. You see that's a chart there. I'm sorry I couldn't make the chart bigger because of the slide. But you see that over the last 2006, right? From 2000 to 2016, 16 years, the red refers to the prevalence of gender dysphoria amongst teenage girls. The blue refers it to amongst boys. From about 2012, it started climbing very fast. Gender dysphoria is where a person gets confused about sexual orientation. Shouldn't be, right? You're born a girl, you're a girl. You're born a boy, you're a boy. But they get confused. It's actually labeled as a psychiatric disorder. And some of them, even severe enough, will want to go for sex change. Why is there a prevalence of this incident over the last 6 years? I'm sorry, but these statistics actually were obtained from Amsterdam. I think we have a visitor, two of visitors who are actually from there. And these are taken from a medical journal that's in there. And that rise in gender dysphoria actually coincides with the introduction of the what do you call it, of the being awoke, being LGBT friendly into schools and into governmental policies. And school children are actually told or taught even to embrace the LGBT friendly policies. Now, this gives a perverted sense of heroism to the teenagers in embracing transgenderism. And that was one of the reasons the researchers felt accounted for the rise in gender dysphoria. Thirdly, even more importantly so, the woke movement can weaponize the language, especially amongst the marginalized, and bringing up even this term called critical race theory. The word woke has been moved from the rhetorical roots in the black community to become weaponized today, to pass legislation undoing much of the social justice progress that's been benefiting the marginalized populations. Words like woke and associated imagery, including critical race theory, have become catalysts to carry out culture war policies that harm and alienate people from their full participation in a democratic society. For example, compassion itself. Would you imagine that compassion can actually be weaponized? It's being used as a weapon in ideological revolution to appeal to masses, even when Christians are being pulled in. For example, Christians are accused of sending LGBT or transgender people to their death if they do not allow these LGBT people to live according to the gender preference. The claims are that lives are at risk, and why do you have to be so strict about marriage? It becomes manipulative, weaponizing compassion to appeal to the masses. Then there's judgmentalism, or what we call the call-out culture, and also the cancel culture. Now, the former US President, Barack Obama, he stressed an important point during a televised conference for youth activists in October 2019. How youths make a show of how woke they are in calling each other out. When they see flaws in each other, they call each other out. And also, they call out the older generation, because these people who are called out were perceived to have personal failings or flaws. And these are not major ones. But Obama reminded them it does not contribute towards activism and does not bring about any change at all. He further challenged the youth activists on their purity and judgmentalism, which were in question. He added that in this messy world with so many ambiguities, many people that do really good stuff still have flaws. And he appealed to the youth's sense of fairness and compassion. He also touched on the harm that the media can do in its role at the speed by which a flurry of negative social media can achieve their purpose in relation to cancel culture. Not cancer, but cancel culture. A culture where someone is cancelled out, totally marginalized, ignored, wiped out from being recognized. And all the previous recognitions are completely excluded from the media. So Obama concluded with saying, that's not activism. That's not bringing about change. If all you're doing is casting stones, you're probably not going to get that far. And that's easy to do. And finally, fomenting rebellion against all and any oppressor. When authorities or conventions are seen as oppressors, it is natural for the oppressed to have to fight against or eradicate them, says Jordan Peterson. When one fails to recognize God's love being the external force that determines our successes, rage and anger are directed towards authorities for failing to deliver justice. There arises what happens? A blame culture and failure to work in order to progress on merit. So instead of taking responsibility for the circumstances and to work out solutions, some take the stance of just being woke to injustices and then go around pointing them out. There's an injustice there. Something should be done about it, but not provide the solution. That's another one there. Start blaming, finger pointing and blaming. And this sets the individual back significantly. The person who does it gets set back. For example, we all are in the workplaces, and you know the last one to be promoted in the workplace is always that someone who always points out everybody else's mistake, but never points out his own, never admits to his own, and the one who constantly lock horns with his superior. But the woke movement has managed to convince one whole generation that this is the way to go through life. And you can get through life by being woke. So in summary, just by being aware of injustices and taking preemptive, positive, non-violent, non-harsh measures to alleviate these injustices, inequalities, and differences in whatever degree you are capable of, do not constitute being part of the woke movement. It may have altruistic origins, but in recent years, it's been hijacked by those seeking for power and popularity through deceit and weaponized to fulfill their own agenda. So don't be taken in by the false goodness on the surface of being woke. But yet, don't stop being aware and awaken to the needs around us, and don't stop doing good. So in conclusion, how do we combat the woke movement? What can we do to fight it? One, to create awareness at multiple levels, different ages, the connect groups, the network that you have, and different races, so that people are starting to be aware, to be truly aware, to be awakened to the dangers. That it is a justice movement that is more unjust than just. And there is also an underlying spiritual battle to it. The Bible tells us more often than not that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And when you have come into realization that you cannot conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, then you'll be able to test and approve what the sovereign God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will for you. So you want to find out more about how you can rely on Jesus that's completed all that you need to bring you into God's sovereign will at the cross. Do come up to speak to me or any of the leaders here, even Pastor Joel, after this talk. We'll be around and more than happy to answer your queries. Then the next thing you can do is to equip yourself and get knowledgeable. Do some research. Go on Google search yourself. You can find this data. Now be discerning, because some of these are fake news and they're fake websites that will generate these half-truths, as I say, and make them and totalize it into a whole package that sounds plausible. But make yourself knowledgeable, because due to the constant shape-shifting and the manipulation of the language, confusion may arise from time to time. When the woke movement will capitalize on it, so be clear yourself and do not fall for these tricks. As you become more knowledgeable with God's help, you'll be able to allay fears of being labeled as unjust, arrogant, or portrayed as a bad person, or fear of being silenced. You have to decide yourself if you want to make a stand against this massive lie, which is the woke movement. At times, it will be a cost to yourself. Maybe it may cost you some time and effort, maybe even ridicule, marginalization, or perhaps even persecution. But I'd like to encourage you to take prudence, to be wise, and to take courage, because Jesus can assure you that He who is in you, if you have a relationship with Jesus, is greater than He who's in the world, and will enable you to take this path. So find someone who's of the same mindset as you are, and be united in this. Have confidence to call a lie a lie. And lastly, if you are a Christian, to pray and to depend on the power of Christ. Don't fight rage with rage. Don't fight anger with anger. And that's exactly what Jesus was saying early on, that if someone slaps you, offer the other cheek. It doesn't mean that you literally go and ask people to slap you, but it just means that don't give tit for tat, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Pray and to depend on the power of Christ. Don't fight rage with rage, but with the love of Christ. Now I'll leave you with this quote by Noel Merring. Hatred for an ideology can easily become hatred for the person espousing it. And this would result in the triumph of the very thing we think we are fighting. Yeah, if we go tit for tat, you are actually giving them a victory. So don't fight rage for rage, but to realize the subtle underpinnings that are behind the woke movement, and to move on in what the good Lord has laid upon your heart. Thank you very much for listening. I think we have a time for Q&A here.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Sum Keong, for that amazing sharing. We're going to go into a time of Q&A, and we will both sit here. So feel free to ask your questions on both on Zoom as well as those of you who are here. Just shout out your question, and I will repeat it so that our friends on Zoom can follow along as well. Right? Let's see. Sorry, where my question? Okay. So earlier, just a little bit earlier, you spoke about that whole 2 + 2 = 4, but 5. How do we respond? I'm talking about a practical thing. I mean, I start with a practical question because, we know for a fact, in a logical sense, 2 + 2 = 4. So how do you respond to someone who insists 2 + 2 = 5, and they're like, no, it is 5? Yeah, how do you? What's the best way to respond to someone like that?
I think the first thing is to understand where the person is coming from. Even as young as a child, they have been indoctrinated, perhaps by the parents at home, by the peer pressure, by the other children that play around them, and also the teachers who are in the school, who subscribe to this woke culture or the woke movement. And they've been told it's actually started off as an affirmative action. That in order to level the imbalance between the poorly performing students and the smart students, so we don't tell them, hey, you're wrong all the time, so they get discouraged. So that was the good intention that's behind it. But as a result of this, it doesn't do well. It works only for that while there. So if it was a child, I think gently, you have to correct the child. To tell him that's not the right answer. If I were the parent and it's my own child, I will correct. Well, if it was somebody else's child, then you have to be discerning and be careful of what the other parent expects. Because there are parents who will complain, you marked my paper wrong, 2 + 2 = 5, but it should be right. And they will come and complain to the teacher. What do you do in situations like this? You see, there are parents who believe so firmly in that. It's along the same line as there's this group of people who believe, we call them the world is flat. Right? No? The flat earth theory, right? There are still many who believe that the earth is flat, no matter what you tell them. Even you tell them scientific evidence, you show them pictures from the space satellites that say the earth is round, they still will say in the horizon, I always see a straight line. You explain to me how it's flat. No matter how you talk about perspective and say light doesn't bend round circles, light doesn't bend. So it's flat to me. So no matter what you say, they are so convinced to it. I believe when dealing with adults, we need to have patience. We need to have that compassion and mercy. That after all, this is someone who's also made in the image of God, though he may not have a relationship with God, but he's someone who deserves the love and care as much as any of the people that we mix around with. And I think patience and love are the two important characteristics that we need to have and to adopt when we speak to such people. Loads of patience. It won't be settled with just one conversation.
Indeed, patience. And everything starts from patience. I think it opens us to more conversations. It opens us to be better listeners even as well. Yeah, I'm going to just drop a reminder if you've got any questions. It's an exciting topic, interesting. So feel free to ask your questions, both here physically, as well as those of you who are on Zoom this evening with us. I'll go ahead and ask this next question. So the whole premise of being woke is being aware, right, of what's around, especially the current issues like feminism, Black lives, LGBT, things like that. But there seems to be a connotation where you need to have a response. So if you are not for it, you're against it. But actually, I want to say, I know it's happening. I'm aware of it. But I don't want to respond to it. I'm aware. Apparently, it's not good enough. So how do we weather this storm where the people who are very much for it, they expect a response? You must be for us, otherwise you're against us. That kind of thing. When actually you're aware, but you don't want to necessarily have to respond. Yeah. How do you go about it?
Thank you for bringing up that question. It's a very good question because it depends on the society and the circumstances the one is in. For example, if we were to be in the United States now, there are actual legislations that says that the school should have 3 types of toilets: for the male, the female, and those that are not sure. The sort of toilets. There are many other legislation, like for example, the teacher are not supposed to tell the child that they are wrong, even in answers like that. And certain states have actually passed legislation. So on that level, we are bound by the state law, if you were to stay in the states, to comply with it. There are times when we may not agree, but we will agree to disagree in situations like this. No way am I encouraging anyone to go and flout the law. But that is a matter of personal opinion. I know it's a very difficult situation where if you are a teacher and you are supposed to implement this legislation in class, and if you fail to do so, you lose your job. And there are news. Once in a while you hear news that some teachers who stick to their ethics and the principles and say no. So it's according to each one's ability to stand and stand on their own principles. And even though it's a law, whether you want to risk losing your job, this is where I think with the last part, what can we do to combat this situation? Each to his own ability, whether you can stand on your own principle and ethics, and also according, if you are a Christian, to what the Bible tells us you should make a stand for. That's on one level. The other external force that exerts pressure on you is peer pressure. The people that we go around with, and as I understand it, even in the church context, there are a lot of young adults who are for LGBT. There are young adults who are for sex outside of marriage. Well, the Bible does describe it as licentiousness. And it's, I guess, since both of us are pastors, I think we are the role models that ought to make a stand for it. And if we keep quiet about it, this is where people will misunderstand. As we say, the language is so important. The language we use, whether we speak out against it or we keep quiet about it. And keeping silent a lot of times means consent to a lot of people. And I believe that this is where, again, depending on the situation we are in, that we need to make a stand for it. It is difficult. I did outline at the last part there, where it may come, making a stand may come at a cost to oneself. at the cost of maybe a pride, personal pride, maybe even at the cost of perhaps even jail time. We make a stand like that. We have not come to the stage where you are forced to sell goods to someone of the LGBT community, but I believe Singapore is looking into passing that law. I'm not sure whether it's passed, but the last I heard, they were debating it in the cabinet. So situations like this do arise. There is also one part where I spoke just now, that we need to be aware that being woke does not just involve you being aware of a situation of the social injustice, but to comply with the agenda that's behind the process of correcting the social injustice. The fine line is to take a non-violent, non-harsh, and certainly not in contrast or in contrary to what, as a Christian, to what the Bible teaches, that when you make such a stand. So the difference is there. So it's okay to be aware. It's okay to have conversation and we talk about the injustices, and it's okay to do something about it. Because Jesus himself did say that if someone asks to borrow money from you and someone asks for something that they require, please give it to them. Take a positive preemptive action. Even before, you have to say that whether you are for them or against them. Because a lot of times, when they put you under pressure, it's using language as a weapon against you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, sometimes even our language is so important, and sometimes it can be misunderstood, even the best intentions.
Yes.
We are running out of time. Oh, okay, we've got a question, Keep. Just shout out your question and then I'll repeat it. Yeah.
Do you have a one-sentence reply to someone who says, "Are you woke?"
I'll just repeat the question. So do you have a one-sentence reply to someone who asks, "Are you woke?"
Yeah, my answer would be yes, I'm woke, I'm aware, and I will continue in that same sentence to define what I understand by being woke. To many people, when you say you're woke, the implication is that you're for the LGBT, you're for the Black Lives Matter movement, you are for the, gender equality, and if you're a lady, you are with the feminist movement. These are the implication that when you say you're woke. So, for me, I'm not with the feminist movement. In the first place, my gender does not qualify me for that. But in all the other areas, I would say, yes, I'm aware of the social injustices that are there, but I'm also aware that there are many times there are political or even hidden agendas behind these movements. And you have to tell me, what exactly do you understand? So I will continue the conversation by getting the other person to define what you mean by woke, and let's have a conversation. I think the important thing is to maintain the conversation, to continue to engage them with what we believe, what I believe is the truth. When they have the half-truths, and at the end of the day, what is actually the truth will vindicate itself. And I believe God will be behind that, and He will also vindicate the truth that we speak.
All right, thank you. I hope that answers your question. Let me just address this question online. We've got a question from Adriana. She asks, is it wrong to stand up for what is right? So an example is inequality at the workplace, different pay based on race or gender. And how do we know that the woke issue doesn't become a negative stand or a negative connotation? How do you go about that?
Okay. It depends on who originated the woke initiative in this case. In an office, I wouldn't call it a movement, but the initiative. If it is something that, for example, Adriana is aware of and she wants to bring it up, I think it's absolutely right to bring it up. When you see an injustice in the workplace, it is absolutely right to bring it up to the boss. In fact, it is very courageous of her to do so on behalf of the whole workplace community. It's the manner in which it's brought up. I spoke about the woke movement sometimes tend to create a whole generation of people that will point fingers. If the intention is just to point out the fault without offering any solution, or without really willing to settle for or to go for any settlement with going with a give and take sort of spirit, that the management takes one step forward and you take one step forward and we meet halfway. And I think that's the spirit in which you should approach in order to settle any injustices, even at the workplace. So I believe that it is okay, it is right to do so. But provided you don't hold placards outside the office and you start demonstrating, KYIP is unfair, to the, I think that certainly won't bode well, and I believe that it's not right in the eyes of many, let alone amongst the Christian community.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So go ahead and speak up, but do it in a right way, I guess. Yeah. Thank you for that question, Adriana. We've got a question right here from Max. Go ahead.
I'm seeing that a lot of younger people are embracing this woke movement, and part of them is kind of like getting in part of it and agree to it is like a trend. It's like to blend in, especially the younger one. My question to you is, as a church, also as a parent, sort of like you are anchor yourself to the church, want to do the right thing. If we keep on to that, if we stick to that mentality, want to do the right thing, we in another way sort of like distancing ourselves from the younger generation. My question is this: what's the church going to do about this? How do we narrow the gap? How do we bring these people back to church? How do you deal with this new movement here? And second question, as a parent, we find that sometimes when you engage in a conversation with our kids who is so open to this woke movement here, and throughout the conversation, you'll find a lot of conflicts. And that's also the gap getting bigger. What would you recommend us as parents to do?
Okay. That's a very keen insight, a very keen observation that you notice, and it's absolutely true. I agree with you. It is happening right now, even in Malaysia. Not as bad as it is already in America, but it's happening right now in Malaysia. It boils down to one word, actually, the relationship. The relationship that has developed prior even to the onset of this movement. Now, you made a comment that you said that this woke thing is something that has come on recently. It's something that's really like you don't know what hit us, that sort of thing. But it's not true. This movement has actually been around for 90 years. You see, it's part of the revolutionary ideology. And what has happened is that the communication has broken down. The relationship between those in authority, which are perceived as the oppressors, and those that are powerless, who are perceived as the oppressed, have not been able to come to the table to discuss and to negotiate, and therefore revolutions happen. And this is just a boiling down to present-day society, which makes it all the more easier because of the media. And communication is now, there's no excuse, because communication is so available and so widely available. But what is important is the depersonalization of this communication. Like for the last 2 years, COVID, we have a virtual church. We met only online, but we never actually met physically. And now that we are actually seated here physically, all of us can attest to the fact that it's different. It's different from meeting from online. It's that personal touch. Now, I'm coming down nearer now, zooming in now to the family unit. One of the hidden agenda, in fact, which was brought up by this lady who is the writer as well as part of the think tank, the Washington think tank, believes that one of the, which I didn't mention, one of the harmful effects is actually an attack on the family and even on fatherhood of the family. So the family unit is also under attack, not actually intentionally by the Black Lives Movement, I don't mean to say that, or even by the feminist movement or anything, but because people fell prey to the deception that's within this woke movement, people would just go along. Remember, I was saying that we don't realize there's this filter. We just go about life without thinking that there's a filter there. So we just act by default naturally. So if this has crept into the family unit, what has happened is that relationship was never formed in the first place, right from very young. The Bible teaches us, teach a child the way he should go when he was young, and when he grows up, he will never depart from the Lord, right? So that relationship that, you see, now I'm coming to the second part. As a church, what can we do about it? You see, as a church, we always, well, there's this cliche that you may say. It's not only about doing the right thing, but doing about the righteous thing. So we need to go back to the righteous principles that were actually given to us when we were younger, way before this woke movement has hit us. Because before that, there was something else, the hippie movement. Before that, there were Brexit. Before that, there were a lot of other things, but it follows the same principle. So if you have given the child, the family unit in the first place, the right foundation, the right grounding, and if I may suggest a practical solution would be to have a regular family altar where you actually relate to the children. I think in the last Father's Day video, I love the part where Eddie Quay was sharing that we have regular family altars and the children will share anything from what happened in school, and they developed that relationship, and you could see that relationship is so close amongst all three fathers who shared last weekend video. And it's that is going to hold it. That's the fabric, that's a glue that's going to hold the family together. That's going to withstand the attack by the movement. It's not clever words we say. We are too small in numbers to be able to go out and even like this video, I wouldn't expect 1,000 hits, even as put that. We are too small a number to form a large collective body to go out there and start influencing as a major body. But within the church context, which I'm coming to the second question that you said, there are many things that we can do, starting from the family unit itself, then starting, as I was talking with Pastor Joel there, as models, as leaders in the church, we ourselves got to make a stand. The fact that if you keep quiet about it, if you are afraid to preach it from the pulpit, if you are afraid to speak about it amongst the young people for fear of losing some of them, they will leave the church, if we are too harsh about it, then we end up in the same situation as those that have fallen prey, as those that have, without filters, that we will, by default, go along with the woke movement. Does that answer your question?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Max.
you for asking
Thanks,
the
Pastor Sum Keong. Was there another hand? Okay, we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask a last question, and I'm going to ask for permission to maybe we can end a little bit later, 5 to 10 minutes. Just maybe in closing, so we see the whole woke movement, and we see the trajectory that it's going on, and I mean, it looks like it's going one way in what you've talked about. But what could happen, if all these changes, if we respond with patience, with love, how could it end up in the future? So where is it now versus where it could be? Yeah.
Okay. One thing which I didn't share in the talk I gave just now is actually the direction in which this movement is going. It is not actually doing very well. Statistically, for example, in the United States itself, every company would toe the line. There are quite a lot of major multinational companies that would toe the line, including companies like IBM, McDonald's, many of the fast food chain. They will all toe the line of this movement in being LGBT friendly, feminist movement friendly, Black Lives Matter friendly, because they were fearing for losing their customers. But now they begin to realize that being woke is not such a cool thing anymore. So over the last 2-3 years, the term woke, maybe in Malaysia it's still a cool thing to be called, you're woke about this. But in the United States, being woke has become a pejoratory term, an insult to some people, that, hey, you're being woke. In other words, only now you're aware of the social injustice, So it has actually turned around on itself. So it only goes to show that these things, like many of the other the movements that were before it, were only a passing trend. As I said, this woke movement is nothing new. It might have come up, rarely said, in the last 10 years, but it's part of a greater thing. The deception that's in the world itself that tells you money, fame, going after promoting sexuality, and all these are the main things that you should pursue in life. That's where happiness lies, and all these are wool over our eyes, and woke movement is just one of the trends that have come. So in effect, basically what we need to do is not to just be swayed by it, be intimidated by it, but as I mentioned, the last few things that we could do is to be united, to be assured and to be certain of the foundation that's been laid within us, the principles, the precepts we hold on to. And as a church and as Christians, I believe that there has been a strong foundation that's been laid. Stick to it, believe in it. The Word of God says there are only two things in this world that will last forever: the souls of man and the Word of God. Things will come, things will go, but it's only these two things that will last forever. So if you are concerned about the souls of man in building relationship, and of course the important thing, Your relationship with God is that which matters the most. And if you have that secure, and you have that in the bag, so to speak, then the other thing is the Word of God that will last forever. Trends will come, trends will go, but the Word of God lasts. The precepts, the ordinances, the foundation, the guidelines. Don't take the Bible as something that is a set of rules that we have to follow. It's never meant to be like that. It's actually a love letter from God to each one of us. And to those of us who are online and those of us who are here too, take it as a love letter. Reply to the love letter, and you'll find that the sender of the love letter will respond in a way far beyond what you could imagine in building that relationship. That will keep you secure for days to come.
All right, and with that, we want to say we've come to the end of today's live talk. Why don't we give a round of applause to Pastor Sum Keong. Thank you for your time and even all your questions, right?